Okay, everybody, hope everybody's doing well. Let's get started with common sense reasoning. The first part of this class covers some basic but more technical and more formal logical reasoning and critical thinking principles. And then we apply those all semester long. So, as a kind of a preliminary to that, and also help set a baseline for expectations for students in the class, let's talk a little bit about common sense reasoning and applying it to some common college life questions, right? Again, trying to set the standard or set the tone for the semester here and provide a backdrop for our discussion of logic. So I got two basic overall objectives here, kind of big picture stuff. The first one is to give some examples of common sense reasoning, um, to use as that starting point for us. I'm actually going to give two examples. It's from the same little clip, but one's positive and one's a negative example. One's an example of good common sense reasoning, although it's not great, it has room for improvement. And then the first one is pretty bad common sense reasoning. And again, doing this to kind of set a standard and expectation for what you need to be doing in this class and in the way you go about handling your schoolwork in general, right? So kind of two things for us there. Again, common sense reasoning, and then a basic expectation for students. As I mentioned, we're going to cover logic and critical thinking in the first part of this class. And by logic, I mean the study and application of the principles of proper reasoning. By critical thinking, we've got this Delphi report mouthful of definition here. So I don't simply mean just negative thinking. That's not what I mean. I mean the purposeful, self-regulatory judgment, right, that we make, which results in interpretation, analysis, evaluations, and inference, as well as explanation of evidential, conceptual, methodological, criteriological, or contextual consideration upon which judgment is based. We all use common sense, everyday reasoning all the time. Where I am right now, and while I'm recording this video, it is sunny outside. There are no clouds in the sky. So, maybe I reason if I'm going to go outside, maybe I need some suntan lotion, and I probably don't need to worry about, bringing my umbrella, right? Common sense reasoning here, right? Um, but again, we're going to begin to approach these philosophical issues not on the basis of just common sense reasoning, but on the basis of logic and critical thinking. And so again, when we're talking about logic, I have something a little more rigorous in mind or technical in mind than just practical rationality, although that's going to be involved as well. And then, we've got quite a bit in mind with regard to critical thinking. How are we going to make informed, well-reasoned judgments and this sort of thing about practical matters? And that might involve several things like using some evidence in logic very well, or in a common sense way, again, without expertise or formal reasoning involved, but informal conversational reasoning involved. We still have to be aware of our limitations. We need to think about how we're going about working through those decisions, right? In our decision making or reasoning process, right? Rather than just blindly jumping into something, right? Or gut thinking, as we'll learn later in this semester. Need to maintain some intellectual humility as well as open mindedness. We're going to have to get used to the fact that we're not always going to get definitive answers, especially for complex issues or ambiguous issues, and therefore need to maintain a little, tentative skepticism about how we hold our own conclusions, even in many cases, right? So that's a little bit about what I have in mind when I talk about logic and critical thinking. We're going to get more into that later. But again, what we're talking about right here is common sense reasoning. Now, look, we didn't come up to college to learn common sense reasoning. So this is, again, a baseline for us, right? We're not going to spend our time in class devoted to formal education about common sense reasoning. These are things that everybody ought to be able to apply fairly well for themselves already based on what they've already gained in common experience and common knowledge and our general, social educational practices, both formal and informal, right? So, common sense reasoning is the ability to make practical judgments, effectively arrange means to ends or goals, draw conclusions based on everyday knowledge and typical experiences and generally accepted conventions without relying on formal logic or specialized expertise knowledge like we'll have to do when we're looking at philosophical arguments, right? A little bit later in the semester. Right now, we're just worried about common sense, common experience stuffs. here. So we're going to try and approach this again in a lighthearted way, even though we're trying to, set a basic baseline expectation for student responsibility and common sense reasoning, and give this backdrop for our more formal discussion of more formal logic. We're going to again try to keep it lighthearted here with an example from Family Guy here, right? So take a look at this clip from Family Guy. Notice how Peter reasons in it. He's going to actually reason twice in it.
So if you're a Kiss fan and you live in the Northeast, come out for all 5 shows of what we're calling Kiss Stock.
Oh, hell, the Northeast! It's times like this I curse the fact that we live in French Polynesia.
No, Peter, we're in the Northeast.
We are? And Kiss is coming to the Northeast. That means...
That means...
No, Lois, don't help me. It means we can do something.
Come on, Peter, you're almost there.
We can go to Kiss Stock! Ah!
All right, so in that clip, we see Peter working through the reasoning of whether or not he can go to Kiss Stock, right? Takes him, he eventually gets it right, but it takes him a while, and he does make an initial error. So here we have that part of that conversation in everyday dialogue, right? Again, common sense reasoning takes place in conversation often, or in our own common sense armchair introspections, right? As we work through things and decide what to believe or make a judgment about something, right? And so we've got this dialogue here. And just as a preview of what I mean by formal reasoning, we could take this casual argument, this everyday argument, again, casual, right, and formalize it. So let's do that with both of instances of Peter's reasoning. So first, we've got this argument here, his original reading that says, if we live in the Northeast, then we can go to Kiss Stock. But he mistakenly believes that they do not live in the Northeast. So what's called premise 2 here, the second line of the argument, second statement in the argument, is actually false. Therefore, he draws a mistaken conclusion, which is also false, that he cannot go to Kiss Stock. So on the basis of a bad premise, he draws a bad conclusion, right? Later on in the semester, we'll learn that this argument form is called affirming denying, sorry, I got it backwards there, denying the antecedent. So I'm just going to give it a little DA designation there. That's actually a formal fallacy. Again, we'll come back to this stuff later. And then on the other side is his corrected reasoning, right? So same first premise. If we live in the Northeast, then we can go to Kiss Stock. Gene Simmons expressed that. Cartoon Gene Simmons expresses that in the clip. And then Peter does get corrected. Lois points out that, no, Peter, we live in the Northeast. And then she has to kind of, wait for him to get the inference, to make that final judgment and draw that common sense conclusion, right? But he eventually gets there, right? So we've got 2 mistakes in Peter's common sense reasoning. False information, bad information, and then it takes him a little bit of a while to figure out, to make that common sense implication, right? The inference, or draw the conclusion on the basis of the correct information, right? So that's Peter Griffin's reasoning. That's not like a one-off for Peter. That's more common of his everyday reasoning, right? But we've got to be better than Peter Griffin here, right? We're in an institution of higher learning, so we've got to be better in our common sense reasoning than Peter Griffin is. So got a couple of examples for us to worry about here, just as a way of kind of doing a little college 101, and also providing a backdrop for the more formal reasoning we'll be learning about later. Got 3 little basic objectives here to apply some common sense reasoning. We're going to need to interpret ordinary language in a reason and context sensitive way regarding, a realistic college scenario, not just a cartoon issue, right? Like in Family Guy. We're going to need to make and evaluate common sense logical inferences. There's where one of the things where Peter struggled with, right? First, he has a mistaken piece of evidence, and then it takes him a long time to draw the correct inference, right? And then we want to reflect on the relationship between rules, terms, and implications regarding everyday life, including everyday college life. And what we're driving at here is, what kind of common sense conclusions and reasoning can we use to answer everyday common sense questions about college? And I get 2 questions all the time from college students. Actually, one of them, in my experience anyway, is much more common than the other one. So here are these two common questions about class that I often get. The second one here down on the bottom, can I make up the work I missed? That's a classic. I'm used to seeing that my entire teaching career, right? But this first one up here up top, and that's the one we'll spend more time on here, I've only really ever gotten post COVID. It's one of those kind of things that popped up after COVID that seemed a little weird to me, but it is a common question that I often get these days. So I'm going to include it here. We're going to take that one first. So again, we'll be focusing on this first one here about practice assignments. Here's our question. Does the practice stuff count? Do the practice exercises, assignments, or quiz count? And again, we just got a little hypothetical scenario here, but one that is very, close to real life. We've got an example class policy. This is not my class policy that's in your syllabus, but it is an example of a class policy that one might have or expect in a college class. And then we got a question about it, right? So here's our example policy. Weekly practice quizzes are designed to help students prepare for major assessments. Practice quizzes will be posted online each Friday and must be completed by the following Monday. These are meant to help you track your progress and engage activity in the material. And then we get our question. Do the practice quizzes count towards the final grade? Why or why not, according to this policy, is our question there, right? So you can imagine a student asking, well, do these practice exercises count for anything? Do they matter? So some considerations that has to go into that decision making, right? What are the key terms and ideas in that policy, right? What inferences and conclusions can you make from the policy's wording as it is? Just again, on the basis of common sense meanings of those terms, the everyday meanings of those terms, the dictionary definitions of these sorts of things, right? So are there reasons to think that these quizzes or other practice assignments might or might not count or affect your grade? And then simply, what does the term practice imply in this context? That's not a strange philosophical term. It's a term we use all the time. We talk about, hey, we watched the baseball practice, or I went to football practice, or soccer practice, or I was practicing my instrument for the recital. I was studying for class and did some practice exercises, right? This is not a crazy out there term. It's a very common term, right? So it's pretty easy to understand what might be going on in this policy, at least in terms of a sincere question about that policy, right? It should be pretty straightforward. So practice can mean the actual application of something as opposed to thinking about it in theory. It might mean customary, habitual, or expected procedure, a way of doing things, the way that we have the practice of grading or giving exams in school, right? Or a medical practice, right? Often involves surgery, right? Or lab tests. Right. And then lastly is a verb to perform or exercise a skill, right, or some activity repeatedly or regularly in order to improve or maintain one's proficiency. So what sense of the term practice is most relevant in this context, right, of school and practice exercises? So just go ahead and for yourself, in your notes or just in your head, fill in this sentence to answer that question. Do the grades for practice activities or quizzes count, or do they not count towards the final grade? What's the answer to that question? And then again, just to preview a little bit, we could put it in the form of an argument and say that once we get our sentence complete, we'll know that either grades for practice exercises either do or do not count towards the final grade. We know that assignment X or exercise X is a practice exercise, so it has that label on it, and then be able to figure out what follows from that as the conclusion, right? So if you're still a little bit worried here, maybe ask yourself some follow-up questions if you don't have a good idea yet. Can something be labeled practice but still have real or significant consequences? Is there a difference between grading something, right, and requiring it, right? I don't always grade each and every reading assignment, whether you did it or not, but like whether you did it or not, it's going to, that's kind of stuff is up on the exam too, right? So it's required reading, right? Need to fix my spelling there. It looks like I got an error right there. Got to fix that. So I got to, got to be better at the practice of grading, or not of grading, of editing my PowerPoint slides there, right? So then what more would you need to know to be confident about your answer given that example policy and common sense reasoning, right? And so we could do this with just about any question that's a common question about school, right? So here's another one again. We won't go all the way through this one in as much detail. I'll leave it open-ended or unanswered for you to think about yourself. So can I make up the assignment that I missed, right? Common question about makeup work in school. Here's our example policy. Again, not my actual policy for our class, but an example policy for this demonstration here, this presentation. So we have this policy: assignments must be submitted by the posted deadline. Late work will not be accepted unless you have a documented excuse or receive prior approval. Emergencies will be handled on a case-by-case basis. So what can a student make up, or can a student make up a missed assignment if they don't have a documented excuse, right? Or just simply, can I make up the missed work or not? And then you have to think about, what are the facts of your situation or not, right? Is it an excused absence? Is it a not? Is it not? Is it an unexcused absence, right? So several considerations go in there that you need to worry about. Simply, what does the policy imply as stated about makeup work? Does it clearly allow or forbid some things from being made up after the fact? What would count as a documented excuse or an emergency? Are there any other relevant policies, like the university's official attendance policy or something like that, right? Are there any gray areas or assumptions you'd question? Are there any exceptions possible or extenuating circumstances? Again, what counts as an emergency or an extenuating circumstances, right, that might justify an exception to the general policy, right? So all sorts of considerations to worry about there, but a question you should be able to answer in most cases in a very straightforward and clear way, based simply on the everyday wording of a class policy in the syllabus, right? And so here's our upshot in terms of College 101. You need to be applying common sense reasoning, right, to how you handle your business in this class, right? And so that means making use of the available information that you've been given, and then making common sense inferences based on that information, right? And so we're all required, faculty are required to provide a syllabus for this purpose, right? So many of those answers are in the policies and information laid out in that syllabus. That's what it's there for, so that you have access whenever you want to. Not just when you're around me or around your email, right? And for this, you really don't need to email anybody. For most of it, you'll be able to figure it out yourself, and then go on and make arrangements for the work or not based on that policy. So again, answer your own question. Check the syllabus first and use common sense reasoning. It's what you need to be doing in class here, right? You could, of course, also upload that syllabus and class information to an AI bot and ask it the answer. But of course, this is where we're headed, right? It's easy to foresee what's probably going to happen here. We're probably very close to a time when it's going to be possible for faculty to automate responses to syllabus question emails that have clear answers from the policies, right? So, I mean, that's probably where we're headed. You can imagine someone generating a message right back to a student, given a clear-cut case of a conclusion based on the circumstances and the common sense reasoning, and get a message back like this, right? That tells you, hey, it's been answered. Just not by me, because I've already answered it, right? So keep in mind, a lot of the information, right, is repeated to you or available to you in very accessible ways for you to make use of, right? So this is, again, the College 101 point here, is that if it's in the syllabus, then you can take that pretty much to the bank, unless there's extenuating circumstances. So if it says there's no makeup work in the syllabus, then there's no makeup work, right? If it says there's no extra credit, then that means there's no extra credit or additional work in the class, right? If it says you have a time limit to make up work that you missed, then you better make up that work within that time limit. So there's no need to contact me or even most faculty members just to check to see if we're going to follow the syllabus or not. We're required to be following that syllabus, right? So that's what it's there for, is to inform you of the policies, right? That's why I've started, going to an informed, acknowledgement form in class to make sure we're all on the same page, right? So you don't got to email me to check, I'm not going to randomly decide not to follow the class policies or to reverse course or something like that. If any kind of situations were to arise during the semester that would require changes to a major change to a class policy or course requirements, those are rare circumstances, right? Or more common things that occur, like schedule changes, like if there's bad weather and the university shuts down or something like that, then I'm going to inform the class appropriately. That's one of my main responsibilities, right? So in terms of communicating things to you. So if something happens where I'm going to change a syllabus policy, I'm going to let y'all know. I'm not going to do that and not tell anybody. And I'm going to, not really do that. I'm going to be very conservative about having to change anything that we all agreed to up at the beginning of it, unless there are just really serious reasons for an exception or some kind of major issue pops up. So again, that stuff's more rare. It's very unlikely. So, summary and overview, common sense reasoning, right? We're about to study logic and critical thinking. So, you got to make sure that you've got a background have a solid basis of common sense reasoning in order to get those finer details that we're going to learn. So, you want to build on common sense reasoning when we're learning about these new principles, basic principles, but still more formal principles of logic and critical reasoning. So, we're going to move beyond common sense reasoning here pretty quick. And then, so again, you need to have an understanding of common definitions and their meanings. It's you can make informal yet logically sensitive and correct inferences based on that information, right? Or effectively arrange, means to ends efficiently. There, it doesn't require expertise really. You don't need specialized knowledge. You just need to refer to these common documents and common everyday terms in order to exercise common sense reasoning, right? And so that's an expectation for all college students, that you're going to be exercising solid and better common sense reasoning skills than Peter Griffin with regard to making sure you've got the right information and then making good drawing solid conclusions on the basis of that information. That's what I'm going to expect you to be doing in this class as you approach how you handle this class in terms of completing your own assignments and thinking through what you need to do to study or to prepare for assignments in order to complete those assignments, and then the application of more rigorous standards to the content of those assignments, the actual problems in those assignments, right? So if you struggle, right, with common sense reasoning, you may also struggle learning and applying these more formal principles of logical reasoning and critical thinking in the course. So this is one of the reasons why I want to have a good baseline here, a good example of a baseline, is because we're gonna move beyond that. You're gonna need to be able to apply these more formal ways of reasoning rather than just common sense reasoning in order to get the best possible grade that you can in the class, right? But good news, if you're struggling with those things, there's a way to get help. There's plenty of resources here at LSU for studying and stuff like that. So you're really already paying for a bunch of that stuff. So make sure you are making use of it. And let's all avoid automated responses if we can. So y'all have a good one. We'll see you in the next video, and we'll be starting up more formal logic in those. So we'll see you soon and in the next video. Y'all have a good one.